but welcome today. We are very, very excited to have RisenSet back again. This is a biannual summit that we do twice per year. My name is Adam Ortman. I'm an SVP of Innovation and Growth here at Generator. So excited to be here, so excited to talk with all of you, all of our partners, all of our clients, teams, etc. Anyone that's really in our universe is invited to these. So it's really, really nice to have this forum in an ongoing setting. For all of you that don't necessarily know where RisenSet came from, it actually started as an internal newsletter that is still alive and living well today. And that is really a mechanism for us as an agency to talk about innovation, to talk about news, to talk about agency news, etc. And that evolved just due to success to a quarterly newsletter that goes out to all of our partners and clients, which if you have not gotten that, feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll definitely make sure that you get that on an ongoing basis. But that really evolved into what we are here today, which is the RisenSet Summit. So these are meant for us to talk about industry news, trends that are upcoming, what are we going to be looking for going into 2022, and really hot button issues that are really relevant to everyone on the call today. I am joined by a fantastic panel, and I do want to thank you all so much for not only just joining us today, but also me nagging at you for weeks and coordinating this event. So thank you very, very much. I'm actually going to do a quick introduction. I'm going to have them introduce themselves. So Suraj, I see you in my top left corner here. If you want to kick us off and just do a quick little 10-second intro, that'd be fantastic.
Of course, yes. This is Suraj Barwani, Chief Strategy Officer at Acuity Ads, a company that invented Illumin, the first omni-channel journey automation platform. We are a publicly owned company.
Perfect. And Justin?
Hi, everyone. Justin Mann. I lead our integrated media team in New York.
So to reach your key audience, but then also report out on outcomes based on things like online and offline sales.
Perfect. We're also joined by Mike, who is CEO over at Engine. Seems like he's having some tech difficulties, so we'll see if he pops back on here. Let me just check to see if he's in my list. But like I had said before, extremely excited to have this very prestigious group in front of you. These are not only teams that we work with internally at Generator, but we also lean on our network to ensure that we're constantly evolving, bringing in knowledge into our universe and making sure that we're making the right decisions, having the right foresight going into the industry. So if Mike does hop back on, I'll have him do a quick little introduction of himself. But in sake of time, I do want to just review our agenda. So we're having intros right now. We're going to do a panel discussion for about 45 minutes. We're going to wrap up with a Q&A session, which should be about the last 10 minutes or so of the day, and then we'll close. So we do like to have these as an hour. I know that each and every one of you are very, very, very busy humans, so we don't want to take up too much of your day. Okay, let me add in Mike one more time here, see if I can add him. Sorry for the delay. All right, I'm gonna have Mike jump off and then jump back on. Let's see if that works. But before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping items. We are using Microsoft Teams here for the meeting today, which means that there are some fun things that we can enjoy. So we do have a chat function on the top or bottom of your screen, depending on if you're using the desktop version or the browser version. Feel free to use that chat to interact. We will be moderating with questions. So if you have any questions throughout, feel free to throw them in here. And when we get to the Q&A session at the last 10 minutes, feel free to use that chat box for any questions that you may have as well. Additionally, we do have some reactions. Again, it should be a little emoji face with a hand. Feel free to give our panelists a little love or attention as they're going through their explanations. So we have some different options, whether it's a heart or an applause or a thumbs up, whatever it may be. That's always really great for us to really see. Lastly, in regards to housekeeping, we are recording this summit. So with that being said, this will be distributed to all of you. So feel free to share internally with your teams. There should be some really great content. All right, well, without further ado, let's get started. So it's been a crazy 2.5 years. The fact that we're already nearly halfway through 2022 is mind-boggling to me personally. But the last 2.5 years, just due to the global pandemic, has been a roller coaster. But not only has the pandemic occurred, but we've seen a lot of evolutions occur within our own industry, within our own backyard, whether it's CCPA, whether it's GDPR, whether it's the rollout of iOS 15.4, advertisers and brands are rolling with the punches, right? We're on a roller coaster. We're talking about evolutions, not only from a legislative perspective, from a technical perspective, but also from a philosophy perspective and how we address customers, how we address business in general. And that's really why we wanted to bring up the topic of audience science, which is really the idea of, in Generator's perspective, how do we use large amounts of data, safe data, and how do we translate that data and into media targeting? So we have the panel in front of you today, which are all approaching this specific topic from very different perspectives. And I'm very excited. We've talked very in depth about this topic, and I'm excited to bring all of this different perspective to you. I do want to just kick it off with, Justin, if you want to start off from a Google's perspective, what is Google and even your personal experience? What is your definition of audience science? And why are we talking about it today? Why is it important?
Yeah, you mentioned roller coasters. A lot of people like roller coasters, so it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. But I think audience science for Google is all things real time. I think for us, real time means real time intent within the marketing funnel. That's for us powered by Google Search, Maps, YouTube, et cetera. And so all of our platforms are fully connected. And so we, through this, have built privacy safe audiences, life events, custom intent, remarketing, et cetera. And so for us, it's really making sure right ad at the right user at the right time. And so all of this is powered by artificial intelligence and machine learning. We've been on this journey for many, many years. And I will say that while it's not possible to track every journey because they're infinite journeys through these two technology solutions, we can certainly track them in real time and understand some really key behaviors. And Google believes that all of these partnerships rely on user trust and transparency. And so we try to give the user as much control as possible.
Perfect. And Mike, we did see you jump on. Apologies if you're having any tech issues over there, but give us a brief 5-second introduction of you as well as why you're here, and also just give us your definition of audience science and from your perspective, why is this important to talk about today?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that, everyone. The Zoom or Microsoft Teams from work thing works most of the time, but sometimes you get a little hiccup. So really happy to be here. Michael Zacharski, I'm the CEO of Engine Media Exchange, and that is the programmatic and technology division of the Engine Group. So again, really happy to be here. Topics. Yeah, jumping into it, I think technology is first, and we all have made tremendous investments in technology, but there's also the people side of being able to utilize the technology and also be able to extract the data out of the technology to be able to then measure and understand both what is happening at a scientific and precision level, but also at the story level, so we can then translate that information to brands, to marketers, to consumers, so they have a human and consumer, a more general understanding of all the things we're talking about here. We all, and you all being practitioners in the media space, have a tremendous amount of knowledge, and we need that, but we also need to be able to translate that out and make it understandable so others can make decisions and good choices based upon that and utilize a lot of that great technology that's available.
Perfect. And Jana, what about you? How do you feel about the audience definition or the audience science definition and its importance?
Yeah, I mean, I guess first off, you can level set just like audience science can mean so many different things in terms of how you go and create different segments, whether that's reaching people based off TV viewership or reaching people based off of their in-store purchases. But specifically for Viant, I would say that it's really that ability to distill many data points back to an actual identifier, and then like creating an audience segment that's likely to drive those those market outcomes. So for Generator, we are currently working on a campaign where we're helping to reach spirit purchasers. So that's based off in category purchasers. But really, we do this in a people-based approach. So working towards actual deterministic data points, not just anonymized cookies or other anonymized proxies, but focusing on real data points like name, address, email, etc., and not relying on just one is super important. And then, taking it a step further, being able to reach both individuals, but also households is another strategy. So looking at bundling people together to continue to target. And the real goal here of audience science and like what we're all trying to solve for is reaching actual peoples and households, not just devices. So really understanding who's on the other end of the screen and engaging with your ad.
Perfect. And Suraj, I know you and I have nerded out at nauseam about this topic. And how are you all defining audience science and really approaching this topic? Did we lose Suraj? Let me see. All right. Well, in the meantime, Justin, looking at some of what you all are doing with audiences and Google. Oh, there's Suraj. There you are.
For some reason, I was muted. No, for us, it's really more about whether you think of the perceptual or behavioral aspect of the consumer. It's essentially all a journey, the metaphorical journey that we keep talking about, right? And the fact that the progressively many more channels have become more addressable just means, to Jana's point earlier, you have many different points from where you are grabbing information about the user, right? Mm-hmm. And I would say that the only thing I can incrementally add to what my colleagues here are saying, it is just as important to be able to understand the need state of the user and where they are, but it's also to understand how much of our marketing is actually influencing both the perceptual change and the behavior change, right? And I think I consider audience science to be a very holistic closed loop assessment of the consumer or the audience, which is what are we trying to achieve? Where are they? And then did they do what did we expect them to do? And can we do that? And I think where we are evolving on the science aspect of it is about closing the loop, how the two come together.
Sure. So it's so very interesting to hear each of you speak about this topic. And, we've been talking about it for a few weeks leading up to this presentation, but it's so interesting to talk about whether it's going after an individual rather than a device, going after a different philosophy of targeting, going after a different tactical area of targeting, for example, with Google, etc. So Mike, I'm interested in you and from your perspective, what do you see as the most impactful changes that are happening today, or even in the short term in the past, that is really generating the most change in today's market?
Yeah, I think we've touched on some of the themes in our previous answers, but I think there are at least three different major things taking place in the market today. On the one hand, Suraj just mentioned it, there's a convergence of biddable media. And so not only is the television now part of the conversation for digital people to have a voice in and to be able to develop programs, a lot of the benefits of the targeting that digital has offered is now broaching the TV space. So I think that is one major theme. I think the next theme is that there's a shift in terms of what the currency of data is going to be in the future as cookies no longer become the dominant currency of identity online. And I think the third one, the elephant in the room, is regulators are increasingly having a differentiated point of view around what is and is not a good or fair practice. And we are all being looked at, judged, and at the same time, being sought to provide solutions forward for a future that is different than what we've seen in the past. So I think each of those is a big topic, but I think those are the three major themes that are taking place in the market right now.
Absolutely.
Build on that. Can I build on that?
Yeah, of
So
course.
the last 2 points that Mike just mentioned, which is the theme of privacy and how it's coming at it both from consumers expecting that you respect their privacy, but also the regulators essentially responding to that need. And I would say that tremendous amount of learnings can be gained for the industries broadly if you look at previously data regulated industries like healthcare and pharmaceutical.
Mhm.
They've gone through HIPAA regulation since the mid 90s. So you've got a quarter century or more of experience there in terms of look at the trends. If you want to see the future, yes, you want to see what has actually evolved. And one of the biggest things that have changed over there, especially in the DTC side of it or consumer side of it, is movement towards more contextual. More contextual relevance, more in the content, more in the information, where are the interests and so forth of people without necessarily going after their personal health information, because that's what's the big no-no is you can't do, right?
Yes.
I think here we are broadly defining privacy. And so I think to the extent that we go in that direction, I think that would be very useful. And there are many other topics I'm sure my colleagues actually can elaborate on.
Absolutely.
I would just add to, so I agree, Serge, 100%. I think contextual is a flavor. The
Yeah.
challenge then becomes, right, targeting versus measurement. And does contextual as a solution then also provide the second half of why we are all here, which is to talk about the measurement side. But I do agree with your point 100%.
Absolutely. And I love that you all are pulling us right through this discussion, because privacy and cookies are obviously on everyone's mind, right? Those are probably the two biggest dips in the roller coaster of the last couple years. I would say that from a generator's perspective, we're very optimistic about this, right? Any time that you see a very large pivot point in the industry, in any industry, honestly, it challenges change. And that change is usually very positive. And actually, we end up better on the other side. I'm going to hear from Jana first, but Justin, we obviously want to hear Google's perspective, because obviously there is that implication of cookies as well as the contextual direction that Google is going in. But from a Viant perspective, Jana, how are you guys foreseeing or even acting today in this new privacy world where we're getting our legs under us, whether it's from targeting or measurement, to Mike's point?
Yeah, so I guess first off, I think we all talk about the cookie deprecation as if it's coming in the future and it's looming, but the reality is that it's here.
Oh, yeah.
We're living in a, we analyze the bid stream constantly. We have tools to kind of understand all the major bid requests coming through, and majority of bid requests actually don't have third-party cookies available. And that's just, if you think about all of the different environments like Safari and Firefox, CTV, mobile in-app, cookies just aren't available majority of the time anymore. So it's really cookieless now. And in terms of how I'm feeling about this, super optimistic. I mean, I'm a pretty positive person, I like to think, but in general, I think that this industry change is going to benefit both the marketers and also the consumers. In terms of the marketers, I think that cookies were never really ideal. We're all forced to pivot together from a status quo, and we can look at this as like a digital renaissance and kind of pivot together. Our co-founders can actually call this the new open web in some of our materials and in conversations. So overall, we do feel super positive. And then in terms of for consumers, I think that this is a great opportunity for them to take back control of their data, to understand who is collecting the data and how they can action off of it. So it's just going to open up, a freer, more open web that is going to drive better consumer experience overall.
Amazing.
Yeah, I think, Adam, as you pointed out, the one thing that you pointed out, right? We are generally, as an industry, very optimistic about this, right? There is no question. But I think it wouldn't be fair to just think of it from that angle alone, because any catalyst that is about transformation or change, the transition is extremely painful, right? And so I think we are in that phase right now where momentarily we are going to see in the short term some sort of a setback in terms of like what the total scale of available, access points are and so forth, because as you move, it's all going to be in the change mode, right? But I think overall, we definitely see some very positive changes.
Absolutely. And I think, Jean, to your point of it's happening now, right? And, we've been working very closely with Google on the options that are available under their umbrella, as well as just keeping very up to date on the updates that are coming across the web, et cetera. But Justin, I think that this is a prime time for you to really talk about privacy and third-party cookies and Google being a Goliath in the space. How is that communication going?
Yeah, I think you asked our sentiment. I think we too are upbeat. We're very excited. Cookies were, I think, made back in 1994 when we were using Netscape as our browser. So I think we can all agree that it is time to move to a new chapter in this space. And I think for us, Google has an outsized responsibility to get this right. We feel that responsibility. We believe that all of these privacy-centric advancements in marketing are the step in the right direction. And I think for us, we're really trying to make sure that we can regain as well as keep our customers' trust that privacy is in good hands, their data is in good hands, and that first-party data is a key to unlock better relationships. And we feel strongly about that. It's a brand new world, especially right now. The past 2 years have been a once-in-a-generation digitization event. And so we've got rapid tech advancement along with reduced consumer trust. And so I know some of us may feel like we're all trying to play catch up, but we will get through this together, and we're pretty optimistic.
Perfect. And looking at, how this is changing over time, and I know that we've talked about cookies, and I know there's been a lot of news over the past year or so about Google's optimistic future, and I know that you're moving in more of a contextual direction, which it seems like there's a consensus among this group that is definitely a good direction to be moving in. Any other details or thoughts or optimisms that you can provide around that contextual direction?
Yeah, so this is moving very fast. We've already made a few changes to our initial timeline that we proposed because we have to get this right. And so I think what I would advise is this is moving very fast. We're keeping what we're calling our privacy sandbox as up to date as possible for advertisers, agencies, all of our partners to ensure they have the latest from us. And so don't have any news to break today, but I think the privacy sandbox will be the best place to stay following along with all the updates.
I had to try, Justin.
Yes.
I had to try. We've been talking about COVID. And if any of you are following our generator comms, you'll see that we just posted a publication about how changes in consumer behavior, external variables has really changed the way that consumers are consuming media. And there are some trends that are happening, back during lockdown, everyone really flooded to social media, right? Everyone's going to more connected TV, et cetera. I'm really interested in hearing from your guys' perspective, how did COVID and the pandemic really affect this change in targeting and in data and in how we're addressing audience science, just due to the fact that the pandemic changed the world in real ways that will be lasting. So Mike, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, I mentioned CTV, so I'm going to skip that one. But I'll go into, I think that, what the pandemic forced brands to do is really think about how are they connecting with consumers? And I mean that both in terms of how do we deliver a relevant message now that things are different and changing? And also, how do we get more out of our advertising? Because the society is impacted, but we as a company choose your vertical. I think for the most part, all verticals were impacted. How do we as a specific vertical need to be cognizant of the fact that we're marketing in a period of disruption, both in terms of how consumers are consuming media, how consumers are spending their money, and obviously how companies are spending their money. So I think a focus on ROI, on channels that before maybe weren't as scrutinized to deliver ROI are now part of that conversation. I don't think that's going away.
I knowing from a generator's perspective, we have obviously a very agnostic and wide purview across categories. And I will say that, while being very data driven since day one, 20 years ago, definitely there is a much heightened sense of focus on ROI, on driving return. And I think I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. And I actually think that, going back to your measurement perspective, which we can have an entire different summit on, to be honest, allows us to bring greater sense of accountability to not only our media, but our targeting as well. So Jana, in your perspective, how did COVID really change how you guys are working on a daily basis?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Michael mentioned. COVID impacted all different verticals. We could go on and on about, how consumers changed their grocery purchasing habits, and it impacted travel. The list goes on. So just being cognizant when strategizing, planning, and targeting, how your consumer, how your key audience has changed is super important. But secondly, I think that as we all slowed down and how the pandemic impacted our day-to-day lives, our media consumption has drastically changed, most significantly in emerging channels like CTV and digital audio. I personally bought 2 smart TVs in the pandemic. I'm a major streamer, and I'm sure many others, and numbers show that many others have kind of pivoted there. Digital audio, podcasting. It just puts more pressure on us as marketers to have identifiers that are going to be present for cross-channel targeting and also measurement, and that's going to be having something that is scalable in all of these environments.
Absolutely. And Suraj, how are you foreseeing or seeing today COVID's ongoing impact to our industry and the data science that we're all trying to pivot with and evolve with due to these changes in consumer behavior?
So yeah, building on what Jana and Mike said, most of the big difference, so because we are a journey marketing platform, it just means that by definition, we are constantly evaluating how the journeys are altering, right? And one of the bigger things that we are noticing, if you look at specific industries, for example, a mega transformation is happening, let's say in automotive industry, for example. Most of the power, to Jana's point, was really on the performance side of it. Previously, dealers is where everything happened, right? That's where all the sales were coming from. And what you began to notice was communications moving upstream and directly to the consumer, a bigger movement towards direct-to-consumer channels, interactions happening there. And then as the supplies and the inventory started shrinking because of all the supply chain issues, all of a sudden, they moved towards more reservations. So now they are like making reservations, like Ford 150 actually did the lightning reservation of 250,000 people who have actually paid deposit, reserved a vehicle that won't even be available for another year. I mean, this is how much control the brand is beginning to exert directly in communication with the consumer, which means the science that's applied here for the audience is much more indicative of the consumer's interest in the ways you engage, which will lead me to one of the bigger trends of all the things we've talked about so far, is the movement to first party. This is how the automotive OEMs are beginning to acquire first party data, direct relationships with the consumers, and boom, now this is the beginning of the transformation, right? And I think how else are you going to gain that? And I think that is the trend that we are beginning to see. More collection of first-party data, more consent, more relationship building, and I think that will lead us in a very positive direction across the board.
I completely agree. And we're having conversations today with all of our clients about the gathering of first-party data and how to do that very respectfully. And that honestly, by gathering data in that way, allows your brand to have a very much a closer relationship with your consumer, right? It's not so transactional, it's more faith-based, et cetera. And I think that's definitely powering the reason why this movement is so important. But from a Google's perspective, Justin, I've seen your COVID reports, right? I've seen those audience insights reports, but how do you feel that this really global shift and global occurrence that the world has been impacted by over the last 2.5 years, or I would say 2 years, how do you see that from the Google lens of impacting privacy, impacting targeting and going forward?
Yeah, I think it builds on what I just said on the once in a generation digitization event. And so I think for us, both consumers have sky high expectations. Their behaviors have changed. We, on the YouTube side, for example, now see the connected TV screen as our top device. I was at Google when desktop was the primary watch source of YouTube. And then a few years ago, mobile surpassed desktop. And now we're at the point where TV has surpassed mobile. And so that's an example of that trend. I think on the privacy side, 3 really big things for us to help us all kind of guide here. One is if you talk with your Google Teams or Generator, enhanced conversions for us is a really big thing. And so that's going to ensure that you're getting the best modeling of actual conversion data out there. We see partners who are adopting enhanced conversions, really seeing a lot better attribution there. Google Analytics 4, a mouthful, but that is going to be our next generation of analytics, where available for free. It allows you to build on what Suraj was saying with first-party data, and so that's going to allow you to control your data, ingest that into Google Ads where relevant. The Google Analytics 4 will be something you'll be hearing a lot from us about over the next year. And the last thing is automation. We've been doing automation for many, many years now, and so that's only going to continue to be more and more important. Products like value-based bidding, using our algorithms to ensure we're getting the right value to the right attribution is going to be really important. But yeah, so from a Google perspective, that's where we're thinking on the what's available today.
Interesting. So it sounds like greater automation and greater analytics is really what's powering the movement. And I feel like we had the era of mobile. Mobile was a hot button power word for, God, it felt like 12 years. but it is really interesting to see that these emerging not only devices but technology is changing the way that we all interact with our brands as well as our target consumers, and actually leads very nicely into my next topic, which I want to bring up. And I read a very interesting report from eMarketer a week ago about how it is expected that by 2024, over 100 million users in the United States will begin to use technology like augmented reality and virtual reality. When we're looking at these new emerging technologies, not only are we going to have to reimagine the way that we target, but we're also going to have to reimagine different things, ad placements, ad sets, how do people interact? So it's funny that people are asking, brands are asking, general consumers are asking questions that we all literally asked in the late 80s about the internet, right? Oh, it's just a trend, it's just a fad, it will go away, right? Now the fact that this little device I carry around with me, I can have any piece of information in the entire world. So Suraj, I'm interested in your perspective here as emerging tech becomes more and more prevalent, as we get more digital or physical and digital starts to blend a bit more due to technology. How do you see this idea of audience science blending or evolving, or you could even say, I don't freaking know, because sometimes you don't.
This is a very interesting topic, Adam. I'm so glad you brought this up, because I think it's the bigger question here, and there is one amazingly good news that I'm hearing repeatedly since the last 8 months or 9 months, when metaverse kind of became sort of and blew up on the net. I would say the word interoperability of data is being used with more frequency when it comes to these new sort of universes that are being built and so forth, which frankly is very encouraging, because it is the only way to stay universally connected if that's the way we evolve, because that's what we don't have yet right now here, right? And so I am thinking some amazing power of audience science if it does in fact happen, because now what you're doing is you're connecting spaces.
Yes.
Like, for example, right now there are very narrow choices, like in-game environments, for example. We all get excited about how people are in-game and therefore we can get them because they are so into it. They hate advertising getting in the middle of the game. The audience doesn't want it, right? And so what you really want is to connect the experiences in spaces where they are more receptive to really wanting to hear from you and so forth. And I think that's going to require a lot of analytics in terms of understanding where they are more receptive and where they are not. And frankly, the power of audience science is in not annoying the consumer. I think that's really where the biggest accomplishment hopefully is going to be. If that's something we get it right, then we are going to keep, build some robust communication channels in the long run and build something really nice here. Now, on that particular topic, I will say though, the nice thing is we do have a little bit of a runway here because the people in these environments today are a much more of a younger niche audiences who
Sure.
are more excited about these experiences. But if you really want mass adoption and so forth, I think we have a little bit of time to get it right. And so I'm encouraged by that a little bit, but I'd love to hear from our panelists here.
Yeah, and John, I'm going to you next, but just to parrot with something you said, Suraj, is this, it's going to be really interesting that when these worlds become less about gaming and more about business and commerce,
Yes.
it's going to change the way that we interact digitally. And so from a Viant perspective, Jana, how do you foresee this future?
Yeah, I think that we're absolutely seeing increased demand for, AR, VR, and more uncluttered environments. It's really driven by, marketers trying to shake this up and find more unique ways to engage with consumers, and drive that brand awareness in the right way where they're not annoying them, as Suraj mentioned. Specifically for in-game advertising, something that I was just reading, Wall Street Journal had a whole article about how video gaming is the next big channel. And I think that we all assume it's like 18-year-olds in their basement on a beanbag, like playing a video game. But majority of
Bag. Oh, I miss my big bag chair.
yeah,
Fine.
but majority of consumers that are in video gaming landscapes, they're actually, I think, 80% are over 18. So in terms of audience science, we want to understand who's actually within these channels. Like, is it what we think that it is, or do we need to dig deeper to understand where the target really is? So that'll continue to evolve, as AR and VR take off. I think there's a long runway for that to really become saturated in the market, but it'll be cool to get some good findings in a case study and continue to build off of those insights.
Can I add to this, Adam, to Jana? So
You get 30 seconds, Suraj. You get
very,
30.
very interesting. The thing that I learned the most here in the last couple of years was esports, and the audiences that are part of esports, they're much older in terms of, because they are more viewers, they are more spectators who love to watch other people's play. And I think that's really where you get colorful array and the full spectrum of audiences to go after. Very fascinating.
And Mike, how are your opinions of these emerging technologies that are really changing the way that we do business?
Yeah, so I think of things both in the application world of how people use things, but also in the hardware and software world of like, oh my God, how many more servers are we going to need in order to support more data transfer and more devices talking to us, and us now having to talk back? So for me, one of the themes that we've been talking about internally at EMX and Engine is really, for us, 2022 is the year of more, and we're seeing more devices coming online. We're seeing more data signals passing back and forth. We're feeling more responsibility to the market and consumers. And as we get our technology and data conversations, right, systems talking back and forth in spaces that were more private to the previous conversation, we have to be more cognizant of how that's going to change how consumers think of that space. But also, I think it gives us new canvas to be creative in ways that we haven't thought about before. So, I see the need for all the things we're doing now, and I think the data and data science themes play directly into a world that's more interconnected, more universal, more digital.
Sure.
And I do think it's inevitable. It's an inevitable future in general for, as a society, we're going to be more connected. Data is going to continue to be, as a consumer, the currency that we utilize for access to different devices, to different programs, and so forth. So I think it's a really relevant topic for today.
I love that perspective as well, because very rarely do you approach the emerging technology or these advancements in technology from a hardware perspective. So Justin over at Google, can we use some of your servers? I'm sure you have enough.
Yes, absolutely. Feel free to. I think for us, like we're excited. We love change, and I think all of these new areas that are popping up, we're really, really excited about. I think AR, VR is an example. I think, as Gianna said, we can learn a lot from gaming. YouTube gaming is a huge destination for watch time there, and I think all of these new emerging technologies just are going to keep us on our toes. We're already on our toes, and so we just have to continue to stay that way. And I think it's going to make sure that marketers, we've got to study holistically where our audience are spending their time and money, and we have to make sure we're in front of them, whether that be through a headset or through a phone or through a TV.
There's one thought I have on this, on what Mike actually just said, which is, I don't know if anyone out there is underestimating how challenging it is to gather first-party data, or what is frequently now referred to as zero-party data.
Sure.
The point you're making, Mike, which is, I want to give you the data because I want better quality service. I want better quality interaction, better experience, all of that, right? And in general, if you look at the history of brands who actually want to gather first-party data with these types of things, it's been very hard and it's been very slow adoption, right? Its reaching scale is harder. But I think this interaction with multiple different types of gaming environments, or whatever is metaverse as it is evolving, just gives that many more touch points from where you can gather the information, and the journey becomes much broader, right? So there is so many opportunities here. Yeah, it's going to blow up some servers, I'm sure, Mike, but but the data would still be worthwhile as long as we can get some really good, interesting insights from it, right? Which is powerful.
I completely agree, and I am so happy that I have the four of you on here, because you are all taking a very interesting perspective from this. And we're talking about future technologies like augmented reality and virtual reality. I get the acronyms mixed up, but today, from a generator perspective, all of our clients are testing into cookieless technologies, into contextual and various test and learn methodologies. That's part of our ethos as an agency, is that we're constantly testing, learning, pivoting. We're scaling into opportunity and pulling back into weakness. And we have 80 plus people on the phone today, and they're thinking, we're testing today, but what's tomorrow, right? So what should we be prepared for tomorrow? Yes, we have these sexy things like AR, VR, and the meta universes, but from a tactical perspective, from a tangible perspective, Gianna, I'll let you go first here. How should we predict what's coming next, or do we have any sense of what's coming next?
I mean, I think that all we can do is go into any changes with an open mind. We have to have a lot of different solves, and it sounds like, contextual first-party data, identity-based segments. There are so many solutions, and it's not going to be a winner take all. For me, the biggest takeaway is that cookies are already unavailable majority of the time. So it's really about having an alternative identifier ready that's able to test, now and in today's environments. And is that identity anchor scalable across all screens? And then can you tie all business outcomes back to that identity as well?
Adam, can I build on that?
I was going to you next anyway.
So as Gianna said, we have to evolve, right? With so many different ways of establishing the identity in the right way and scaling it. I would say that I raised the challenge of how hard it is usually to build a first-party data at scale, right? I would say the biggest gold mine after that is building what I call data co-op. The co-ops is what was 25 years ago. Retailers used to partner together and create data cooperatives, because as you know, data always has, I always think of large data sets as with like Swiss cheese. There's always holes in there. And the way you can plug in the holes is by partnering. Somebody has something that you don't have, but if they can establish consent for second-party distribution, it's a huge thing. And so I would say, I would anticipate that across many industries, the ability to build data cooperatives and be able to share second-party would be the fastest way to build up your resource of the ability to scale your data and the audience science.
Very interesting. Mike, how are you all thinking about what's next, or even what is further exploited or capitalized on in the themes that we're seeing already today?
Yeah, I mean, we're, a lot of the same. On this call, we talked about contextual, we talked about first-party data, zero-party data. All of these are solutions that are in market now, to Jana's point. It's happening today. I will challenge, though, I from what I see in terms of how technologies talk to different SSPs and DSPs, there's a lot less cookies, but there's still a lot of reliance on cookies. I would say much more so than everyone wants to really admit sometimes. But filtering on cookies and QPS and all that is still a thing. I'll digress a little bit. So I think the reality is we're looking at a portfolio approach. I'm not the first person to say that, but that is the summation of the different technologies. I think Google has done a great job of communicating what their strategy is, and we've been thinking about how do we partner with Google the best way to make sure we can continue to work together and flow. Similar, with Viant, similar with Acuity, similar with Generator. We're taking a test all and then measure the results, and also survey the publishers to make sure that we understand what they are actually thinking about in terms of how they're deploying different technologies, because they are the first line of defense typically. And I use publishers holistically. It could be an app, could be a gaming device, content creators, apps, the access point for consumers into the world that they are intended to go to. Making sure that we hear what publishers are doing and what technologies they're testing. And they're doing all these, by the way. But I think that is a key thing to listen for as we move forward, to make sure that what we're doing further downstream in the supply chain is compatible to what publishers are doing, because they're the first line. So it's kind of like a canary in the coal mine.
Sure.
That being said, a lot of noise in those conversations as well. So I'm not saying that you're absolute, but to add on to this conversation, I think listening to the publisher community is also a good clue to know where the puck is going next.
Absolutely. And Justin, from your perspective, really, how does the next, what do we, if I'm looking at the next, handful of years, what do I really need to be focusing on, or what should I be cognizant of?
It's everything that's already mentioned here, but it's about being great. You just have to be nimble. And I think for marketers, we like playing it safe. And so I think the biggest thing to do is ask yourself every year that goes on, or every planning period you have, is my plan this year within 5 or 10% of my same plan as last year? Did we copy and paste? And we know sometimes when we do. And if that's happening, we're not moving fast enough. And I think for us, you just have to be ready for it, be open to change, be leaned in with Generator and your other partners, because they're doing a great job in this space. And I think the last thing is to understand your audience as much as you can. And from our perspective, the best way to do that is within Google Analytics. So if there's one thing you Google after this, is Google Analytics 4, so that you can start gathering as much data as possible on your consumer in a privacy safe way.
Perfect. So if we were to boil it down into 3 items, it sounds like, be very open-minded into testing and learning. Yes. Keep your eye open for co-op opportunities, or opportunities to share data inter-category, I think is incredibly important. And Mike, to your point, keep your ear close to the ground, right? Because we have publishers and downstream activators that are gathering information or being able to see something even before some of the brands are, or otherwise. So I love all of those perspectives, but I know that we're getting close to time. I told you this hour would go by very, very quickly. So I do want each of you, just in a minute or so, what is your single most important takeaway relating to audience science? And I'm going to start with you, Mike, in today's market and given context of what we talked about today.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of the things we've talked about. Another dimension of it is, attitudinal and auditudinal audiences as a combination of data science and then utilizing all the different signals available is yet another flavor that we haven't talked about. But I think holistically, it's about having an open mind. It's about being aware that we're in a moment of change and embracing that moment and running towards as opposed to away is really going to make the difference. And then just make sure you're investing in the types of talent you need to play in this game, because it is going to change. And there are winners and losers with every disruption. So it's not the most comfortable thing to say, but I think you have to have your eyes open to it in order to make sure you're prepared, because you don't want to be not prepared and then you miss the play.
Absolutely. And Jana, your single most important takeaway?
I feel like I've talked about this to death, but cookies going away, being ready to have a opt-in identity-based anchor and being able to scale that across all different screens. Like as we discussed, there are so many other channels emerging, and it's important to have that identity so that you can follow ad exposure and then in turn marketers' business outcomes.
Perfect. And Justin?
I kind of just said this, but be nimble, stay open-minded. Our growth formula is set an objective, get ready and ingest and learn, but most importantly, take action. And I think it's sometimes we fail to take the action part. And so the more change and risks and the more uncomfortable you are, I think the better you'll be set for success.
Perfect. And Suraj, single most important.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things I take away from this whole conversation, by the way, is that the opportunities to reach the consumer and the channels are expanding immensely, which of course is a candy shop for audience science in terms of trying to grab information, interact with the consumers, get really quality insights. But I would say that the advertisers would be missing a huge opportunity if they did not concurrently also look at the fact as to how to value them through clear attribution. And that's where some biggest science being applied right now, to think beyond, because we won't have as tight a trackability, right?
Mm-hmm.
As privacy demands that we don't, which means we just have to be even more creative about how we find the effect of these channels so that we invest in all the right places.
Love that. I love that. Well, thank you all. I know that we're about about 5 or so minutes left in the session. We are going to be opening it up to Q&A. So I know all of you have been very closely listening to the fantastic conversation. I'm so happy that it panned out in the way that it did. So feel free to use that chat box on the top or bottom of your screen that looks like a little chat bubble or a little message bubble. If you do have any specific questions, I did have some come through over email on the side here. And it looked like someone has a question about privacy specifically. So I'm going to give this to Google. So Justin, the question here is, do you feel that the privacy movement will evolve further? Is CCPA, GDPR, iOS 15.4, et cetera, the end?
I would say absolutely not the end. I think we can all agree that this will only continue to evolve. The larger crackdowns in Europe and California, et cetera, will probably only continue to be the case elsewhere. And so, again, we have to stay nimble. We're here. We're going to do the right thing by our consumers while following all the regulation.
Perfect. Anyone else have something to add?
I would think, and Justin, this is what I would love to understand if you have any observation on this. But these isolated ones, whether it is GDPR doing its thing, CCPA doing its thing, other individual states are doing their own thing, I see that this is really going to be the catalyst for the federal policy on this thing, which might actually make life much easier for us. And we are not chasing individual initiatives here and there, which can be a nightmare. So I see that as a positive outcome will be the federal policy will eventually come. It may not come this year or next year, but it will eventually come and will simplify, just like HIPAA in the healthcare, as I was mentioning earlier. Having that makes it so much clearer. And we know exactly the rules and principles and guidelines through which we can operate. Just makes so much less confusion, frankly.
Perfect.
Yeah, I agree. The more that we know what we can and can't do, the better we're going to be able to deliver results for our partners. And so I think we're very active in these conversations and supportive.
So I think between now and then, it's our job as an industry to educate consumers about the benefits of ad-supported media and ad-supported commerce, because I oftentimes have these conversations in different circles, and I find that sometimes there's a little bit of a cognitive disconnect between I'll take 50 cents off my coffee from my phone number and my email at point of purchase, but somehow when it's a show I'm watching on TV or a game or something else, even if you rationalize it, there isn't that connection there. So I think we all need to do more to make sure that we're educating consumers and politicians to make sure that when the regulation, if and when the regulation does come at a federal level, that it's a more educated basis that's, you know, influencing what that policy looks like.
Wonderful. We do have a question here in the chat box from Kathy. She's really asking about a complex media mix that can exist across digital channels. You know, how are we able to, given the trend and the direction that this industry is going, specifically with audience science, how are we finding solutions to understand reach, frequency, deduplication, etc.? Feel free to jump in, whoever you would like.
For Viant, I can jump in.
Mm-hmm.
Am I unmuted? Yeah, okay. For Viant, the way that we've approached this is through a people-based approach, as I mentioned, and essentially taking years and years of data and you know, creating that persistent identifier across the open web, whether that's at the individual or household level. So essentially being able to connect all ad exposure to every device that's linked back to either individual or household, to then, you know, cross-channel conversion, whether that's seeing a CTV ad and then going and buying a product on your laptop a couple days later. And then in terms of reach and frequency, I think that we're all challenged, specifically in CTV, a cookieless environment, being able to understand, you know, when a household was exposed on one TV versus the other. So, you know, just it's all about having that identifier that's scalable across every single channel.
So when you're talking about the identifier, if you can give us a 10-second blurb on how does that identifier remain privacy safe, I think is interesting.
Yeah, so we have a large addressable scale of opt-in consumers, and you know it's been cleansed and refreshed year over year. That comes from a consortium of publishers, and essentially that builds our identity scale, and then we reach households through a patented technology where we're linking IP address to actual physical address.
Perfect. That was actually one of the questions that Tom had, so I wanted to definitely touch on that. We are at time. If there are any other specific questions that you have for our panel, they are 100% available to you. So feel free to just send any questions that you have directly to me, and I will absolutely make sure that they get a response back to you. But again, panel, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for your brilliant brains and spending an hour with us. Audience, I know there's quite a few of you. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your day with us today. And I hope that this was definitely impactful, educational, and honestly, at the end of the day, optimistic. You know, we're going through a very interesting time in our industry, and it's going to be a great future that we see within advertising and media and marketing as a whole. So thank you all very, very much for your time again today. This is recorded. You'll be getting a video recording of this, a link that you can share with your internal teams. So have a fantastic rest of your day. Have a fantastic weekend. And I hope to see each and every one of you back at Rise and Set in the fall. So thank you guys so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Generator. Bye-bye.
Thank you.